My brother stole my identity to get a loan, so I stole his identity to ruin his credit. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was standing in line at the grocery store trying to buy milk and bread with my debit card. The cashier looked at me with that awkward expression people get when they have to deliver bad news and told me my card was declined. I figured it was just a glitch, tried my credit card, and that one bounced too. My stomach dropped because I knew I had money in both accounts, and my credit had always been solid. I drove straight to the bank, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach that comes when you know something is seriously wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on what. The teller pulled up my account, and her face went pale. She called over her manager, and they both stared at the screen like they were looking at a car accident. Apparently, someone had taken out a massive loan using my social security number and personal information, and when they defaulted on the payments, it tanked my credit score from excellent to absolute garbage overnight. The bank manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, walked me through the paperwork to file a fraud claim. She explained that identity theft cases can take months or even years to resolve, and in the meantime, my credit would remain destroyed. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Everything I had worked for, every bill I had paid on time, every responsible financial decision I had made for years, had been wiped out by some stranger who decided to steal my life. I spent the next few days making phone calls to credit bureaus, filling out forms, and trying to piece together how this had happened. The loan company gave me some details about the application, and that's when the pieces started falling into place in the most horrifying way possible. The address on the application was an apartment complex I recognized, the phone number was familiar, and the handwriting on the signature looked like something I had seen 1,000 times before. My brother had been going through a rough patch financially, and he had been staying at that apartment complex for the past few months. We had grown up together, shared a room for most of our childhood, and he knew every detail about my life that someone would need to steal my identity. He knew my social security number because we had helped each other with tax paperwork over the years. He knew my mother's maiden name, my first pet's name, all those security questions that banks ask. He had access to my mail when he was staying at our parents' house between apartments. The realization hit me like a freight train. My own brother, the person I had trusted more than anyone else in the world, had stolen my identity and destroyed my financial future. I felt sick to my stomach, betrayed in a way I never thought possible. This wasn't some random criminal who had picked my name out of a hat. This was family, someone I had grown up with, someone I had helped through tough times, someone who knew exactly how much damage this would do to my life. I called him that night, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. When he answered, I could hear the guilt in his voice before I even said anything. I told him I knew what he had done, and there was this long silence on the other end of the line. Then he started making excuses, saying he was desperate, that he was going to pay it back, that he never meant for it to hurt my credit. He begged me not to press charges, reminding me about all the good times we had shared as kids, trying to guilt me into letting him off the hook. But the damage was done. My credit score was in the toilet, I couldn't get approved for anything, and I was stuck living in my tiny apartment because I couldn't qualify for a mortgage or even a better rental. I had been planning to buy a house, maybe start a family, but now all of that was on hold indefinitely. Every time I looked at my credit report, I felt that surge of anger and betrayal all over again. For weeks, I tried to do the right thing. I worked with the authorities, filed all the proper paperwork, and hoped that the system would make things right. But bureaucracy moves at a snail's pace, and meanwhile, my life was falling apart. I got rejected for a car loan when my old car died, had to put down massive deposits for utilities when I moved apartments, and even got turned down for a job because they ran a credit check as part of the background screening process. The worst part was watching my brother continue to live his life like nothing had happened. He had moved into a nice apartment, was driving a decent car, and seemed to be doing just fine while I was struggling to rebuild everything he had destroyed. It felt like he had gotten away with murder while I was left to clean up the mess. The unfairness of it all ate at me every single day. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I realized that if my brother could steal my identity, I could steal his right back. I knew all of his personal information just as well as he knew mine. We had the same parents, grew up in the same house, and I had helped him with paperwork and applications over the years. I had access to everything I needed to become him, at least on paper. I started small, just to test the waters. I applied for a credit card in his name, using an address where I knew he wasn't living anymore. To my surprise, it was approved almost immediately. His credit was still good because he hadn't been the victim of identity theft like I had. It was strange holding a credit card with his name on it, knowing that I was crossing a line I never thought I would cross. But I wasn't planning to use it the way he had used mine. I wasn't going to run up charges and leave him holding the bag. I had a much more creative plan in mind. I started opening accounts in his name, getting approved for credit cards and loans, and then I would call the companies and report suspicious activity. I would tell them that someone had stolen my identity and was opening accounts without my permission. The beauty of this plan was that it created a paper trail that made it look like my brother was a victim of identity theft, just like I had been. But instead of someone else stealing his identity and running up charges, it looked like someone was stealing his identity and then reporting it as fraud. This created a confusing mess in his credit file that would take months to sort out. I opened a dozen credit cards in his name over the course of a few weeks, each time using a different address or phone number. Some I would use to make small purchases and then report as fraud. Others I would just let sit there and then call to report them as unauthorized accounts. Each time, the credit card companies would close the accounts and put fraud alerts on his credit file. The fraud alerts were the key to my plan. When you report identity theft, credit bureaus put alerts on your file that make it much harder to get approved for new credit. Every time someone tries to open an account in your name, the lender has to call you to verify that you really applied. But these alerts also make it nearly impossible to get approved for legitimate credit, even when you really are trying to apply for something yourself. Within a month, my brother's credit file was a disaster. He had fraud alerts from multiple bureaus, dozens of accounts that had been reported as unauthorized, and a credit score that was dropping faster than a rock. He started calling me, panicking about his credit being destroyed, not realizing that I was the one behind it all. The irony was almost too perfect. But I wasn't done yet. I knew that just ruining his credit wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel the same helplessness and frustration that I had felt when I discovered what he had done to me. So I took things a step further. I started applying for apartments in his name, putting down deposits, and then never showing up to sign the lease. I applied for jobs using his information and then never showed up for interviews. I even signed him up for magazine subscriptions and sent them to his address just to mess with his head. The apartment applications were particularly effective because landlords don't just look at credit scores. They also look at rental history, and when someone applies for an apartment and then disappears, it gets noted in their file. I made sure to apply for places that were slightly out of his budget, so it would look like he was being financially irresponsible and applying for things he couldn't afford. The job applications were more about psychological warfare than anything else. I would apply for positions that sounded interesting, go through the initial screening process, and then just vanish. This meant that recruiters were calling him constantly, asking why he had missed interviews or why he had stopped responding to their emails. It created this constant stream of confusion and embarrassment that followed him wherever he went. After about 2 months of this campaign, my brother was a wreck. His credit was destroyed. He was getting calls from landlords and employers wondering why he had wasted their time, and he couldn't figure out what was happening to his life. He called me one night, crying and asking if I could help him figure out who was stealing his identity. The conversation was surreal because he was asking me to help him solve a problem that I had created. I almost felt bad for him, but then I would remember how my life had been turned upside down by his selfishness. He had stolen my identity without a second thought, and now he was getting a taste of his own medicine. The difference was that I was being much more creative and systematic about it than he had been. Where he had just taken out one big loan and destroyed my credit, I was slowly and methodically dismantling his entire financial life piece by piece. The turning point came when he couldn't get approved for a loan to buy a car. His old car had broken down, and he needed reliable transportation to get to work. But every lender he applied to turned him down because of the mess in his credit file. He was stuck taking public transportation and begging friends for rides, just like I had been when my car died and I couldn't get approved for a loan. That's when I realized I had achieved what I set out to do. My brother was experiencing the same financial helplessness that I had felt when he stole my identity. He was being punished for his actions in a way that was poetic and appropriate. But I also realized that I couldn't keep this up forever. Eventually, he would figure out what was happening, or the authorities would trace the identity theft back to me. So I decided to reveal my hand in the most dramatic way possible. I created one final credit card application in his name, but this time I made sure to include details that would make it obvious who was behind it. I used my phone number as the contact information and had the card sent to my address. When the card arrived, I called him and told him to check his credit report. He called me back an hour later, completely freaking out about a new credit card that had been opened in his name. That's when I told him that I had been the one stealing his identity for the past few months, just like he had stolen mine. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear his brain trying to process what I had just told him. He started yelling at me, calling me crazy and threatening to call the police. But I pointed out that if he reported me for identity theft, I would report him for the same thing. We would both end up in legal trouble, and neither of us would benefit from that outcome. Besides, he was hardly in a position to take the moral high ground after what he had done to me. The conversation ended with both of us agreeing to call a truce. I would stop stealing his identity and messing with his credit, and he would help me clean up the mess he had made with my financial life. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than continuing this cycle of revenge and retaliation. We both had learned that identity theft is a serious crime that can destroy someone's life, and we had both experienced what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that betrayal. It took almost a year to clean up both of our credit files. We had to work with credit bureaus, fraud departments, and various lenders to sort out which accounts were legitimate and which were the result of identity theft. It was a long and frustrating process, but we went through it together, which somehow made it easier to bear. The whole experience changed our relationship in ways I never expected. We had always been close as brothers, but there had been this underlying competitiveness and resentment that I never realized was there. The identity theft situation brought all of that to the surface and forced us to confront the ways we had been hurting each other over the years. It wasn't just about money or credit scores. It was about trust, respect, and the way family members should treat each other. My brother eventually admitted that he had been jealous of my financial stability and responsible lifestyle. He had been struggling with money for years, making bad decisions and living paycheck to paycheck, while I had been slowly building my credit and saving money. When he saw an opportunity to take a shortcut by using my identity, he convinced himself that it wouldn't really hurt me because I was doing so well financially. But he hadn't considered the long-term consequences of his actions. He thought he could get the loan, pay it back quickly, and I would never know what had happened. When the loan went into default, he panicked and didn't know how to fix the situation. He was too ashamed to tell me what he had done and too scared to face the legal consequences of his actions. I realized that my revenge campaign had been driven by similar feelings of helplessness and fear. When I discovered that my brother had stolen my identity, I felt like I had no control over my own life. The official channels for resolving identity theft were slow and frustrating, and I wanted to take matters into my own hands. Stealing his identity gave me a sense of power and control that I had lost when he destroyed my credit. But revenge is a dangerous game, and I was lucky that things didn't escalate even further. If my brother had figured out what I was doing and decided to retaliate, we could have ended up in a cycle of mutual destruction that would have hurt both of us permanently. Instead, we were able to step back from the brink and find a way to work together to fix the damage we had both caused. The process of repairing our credit files was like a form of therapy. We spent countless hours on the phone with customer service representatives, filling out paperwork, and explaining our situation to fraud investigators. It was tedious and sometimes humiliating, but it forced us to communicate and work as a team. We learned to be patient with each other and with the bureaucratic process of financial recovery. We also learned some hard lessons about the credit system and how vulnerable it is to fraud. It's surprisingly easy to steal someone's identity if you have access to their personal information. Social security numbers, mothers' maiden names, and other security questions are not as secure as most people think. Credit card companies and lenders rely on these pieces of information to verify identity, but they don't have foolproof ways to confirm that the person applying for credit is really who they claim to be. The experience also taught us about the importance of monitoring your credit regularly. If I had been checking my credit report more frequently, I might have caught the fraudulent loan earlier and been able to minimize the damage. Now both of us check our credit reports monthly and have alerts set up to notify us of any new accounts or inquiries. It's a habit that probably should have been in place years ago. Looking back on the whole situation, I'm not proud of what I did, but I don't regret it either. My brother needed to understand the consequences of his actions, and the legal system wasn't moving fast enough to hold him accountable. By stealing his identity and giving him a taste of his own medicine, I was able to make him understand exactly how much damage he had caused to my life. It was poetic justice in a way that felt satisfying and appropriate. But I also learned that revenge is a double-edged sword. While it felt good to get back at my brother for what he had done to me, it also put me at risk of serious legal consequences. If things had gone differently, I could have ended up facing criminal charges for identity theft, just like he should have been facing. The temporary satisfaction of revenge wasn't worth the potential long-term consequences. The whole experience brought us closer together as brothers, even though it started with the ultimate betrayal. We learned to communicate better, to be more honest about our financial struggles, and to support each other through difficult times. We also learned that family relationships are complicated, and that even the people we love most can hurt us in ways we never expected. Today, both of our credit scores are back where they should be, and we've both learned to be more careful about protecting our personal information. We still help each other with financial advice and planning, but we're more careful about what information we share and how we handle sensitive documents. Trust takes time to rebuild, but we've been working on it steadily over the past few years. The identity theft situation also made us more aware of how financial stress can affect family relationships. Money problems can bring out the worst in people, and desperation can make even good people do terrible things. My brother wasn't a bad person, but he was in a bad situation and made a terrible decision. I wasn't a vindictive person, but I was hurt and angry and wanted to make him pay for what he had done. We've both learned to be more proactive about dealing with financial problems before they become desperate situations. When one of us is struggling with money, we talk about it openly and try to find solutions together. We've also set up some safeguards to prevent future identity theft, like using different security questions and keeping our personal documents more secure. The whole experience was a wake-up call about the importance of financial responsibility and the dangers of identity theft. It's easy to think that these things only happen to other people, but the truth is that anyone can become a victim of identity theft, especially when the perpetrator is someone close to you who has access to your personal information. Family members, friends, and roommates are often the most dangerous identity thieves because they have the trust and access needed to steal your identity effectively. But it's also a story about forgiveness and the power of working together to solve problems. My brother and I could have let this situation destroy our relationship permanently. Instead, we chose to work together to fix the damage and rebuild our trust. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of time and effort, but it was worth it to preserve our relationship and learn from our mistakes. The experience also taught us about the importance of having a support system when dealing with financial problems. Neither of us had to go through the credit repair process alone, and having someone who understood the situation made it much easier to deal with the frustration and bureaucracy involved. We were able to share resources, split the workload, and keep each other motivated when the process seemed overwhelming. I think the most important lesson from this whole experience is that revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it rarely leads to lasting solutions. The only way to truly resolve conflicts is through honest communication, mutual understanding, and a willingness to work together toward a common goal. My brother and I could have spent years trying to hurt each other, but we chose to focus on healing and rebuilding instead. The identity theft situation is behind us now, but the lessons we learned continue to influence how we handle money, relationships, and conflicts. We're both more careful about protecting our personal information, more open about our financial situations, and more committed to supporting each other through difficult times. It's a strange silver lining to a very dark cloud, but sometimes the worst experiences can lead to the most important lessons.